I'm enjoying still reading through the Bible together. I enjoy reading through it. Some people say, well, if you've already read it once, hadn't you already read all that stuff? Yeah, but man, all these things come out to you that you miss, or that it's been a whole year since you've read, and I think it's very good, and I'm enjoying the study, and I'm enjoying the fact that everybody's kind of somewhat together, and we can have conversations about the different things that we're talking about. I'm enjoying doing that reading and studying together, and then if it's helpful for me to teach through it, teach some things, I kind of enjoy that. I just think it challenges us to see some different things that we might have overlooked or looked over. But if it becomes redundant, just say it to me kindly, and I'll move on and we'll figure something else out. So if you look in the book of Exodus, I want to talk this morning, I want to teach about Moses. I thought a good title for this lesson would be Lessons from a Basket Case. Wasn't Moses a basket case? Literally. And so just to put some things together, making connections, remember that the reason that the children of Israel are in the land of Egypt, remember that the reason that they're there is because there was a famine. And when they had to go to Joseph for him to, give them the things that they needed, that's what took them into the land of Egypt. And then now they're there, and they've been made prisoners while they're there. They've been being used as slaves while they're there, and God makes a promise that He'll take His children out of Egypt, and He'll take them to what we call the Promised Land. So in the book of Exodus, the word Exodus obviously means departure, like to leave, to exit. And Moses rises up as a key character here. And you'll recall that there was a decree kind of that was put out that said, we're afraid that these children of Israel, they're going to get too powerful, they're going to overtake us, they're going to become enemies of ours, and we better start cutting down the population. So a decree went out that to all the midwives, that they would kill all of the male children. Now, we're familiar of another time when that same decree went out, right around the time that Jesus was born. And I love the response of the midwives when they said, these women, though, they're just so lively. Said, by the time we can get in there, the babies are already out, and we're just not able to, to do anything. And so I love that answer. I think that's a funny little way to put a spin on it. But it lets you know that those women were anti-abortion, weren't they? They said, we're not going to kill these babies. These are perfectly fine and healthy children. And so they would have their little schemes for getting them out. And Moses was one of those famous schemes where they put him in a basket, and they put pitch on the basket where it would float, and they pushed him on down the water. And so Moses was saved that way. So Moses comes out, and he is raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And then we know that Moses then grew up and he made a mistake, right? Moses killed somebody. So not only was Moses a basket case, but Moses was also a murderer. He came out into the field or the yard one day. He saw two men struggling together, and he killed the Egyptian man. That's not a light thing, even though it was Moses. He killed him. Man, that's a big deal when you take somebody's life. And so he killed the man. He buried him in the sand. He thought nobody would know. And then the moral of that story is that there's always somebody watching you. So then a little later on, there's an altercation, and Moses said something, and somebody speaks up and says, oh, you're going to kill him like you killed that other man? And Moses said, oh man, people know. So Moses leaves, and he goes into the wilderness lest they would penalize him, unless he would, have to pay for this murder that he has committed. So then where I want to pick up this morning is where Moses, where he picks back up, and he's been out in the wilderness for a long time, and he's just kind of been off the map, and then you have this instance in Exodus chapter 3. I think there are some really good things to learn from Moses, and I hope you'll enjoy this study this morning. Look at with me, if you will, in Exodus chapter 3. It says in Exodus chapter 3, now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. So as Moses has left the city part and he's gone out, he's become a shepherd. And now he's keeping a flock that belongs to somebody else. And it says in verse number 2 that the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, now I want you to pay attention to this. It says, he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Now, I don't know about you, but my whole life I've heard the story of the burning bush, but I've never really known what to take away from it. And sometimes when we don't know what to take away from a story like that, we just say something like this. Well, I guess it proves that God can do crazy things to get our attention. Most of my life, that's just kind of how I chalked up the burning bush. It was just one of those miraculous, crazy things. But upon deeper study, I think there's something more applicable to be taken from it. Now, I want to read verse 2 again. It says, he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed. So Moses notices, hang on, there's a bush right here that's on fire. It's burning, but it's not burning up. And it says he looked and he saw that, but I want you to notice number 3. Now, I'm a little bit of a literary person, and things like this that are written in an unusual way, they stand out to me. And if you look at verse number 3, then it says, and Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Now, I don't know about you, but that strikes me as unusual. So I'm going to read it one more time. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but it was not consumed. But then Moses said, I will now turn aside. To me, it sounds like I'm going to make a deliberate effort. I've seen this, but I'm going to turn my whole self around. He said, and I'm going to see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Now, here's what I think is the truth and the application to be taken for that. Moses could have easily gone with verse number 2, wow, that's crazy. The bush is burning, but it's not burning up, and kept right on walking. But he said, I noticed that the bush is burning, and I keep saying this over and over and over because I'm going to make a point. I noticed that the bush is burning, but look at verse number 3 again. I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Now look at verse number 4. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, that he deliberately made an intentional effort to turn and focus on this thing, it says this happened. The Lord God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here am I. Every morning when I wake up, my Bible is sitting on my kitchen table. Sometimes I get up and I take my shower first. Sometimes I get up and I immediately go and I read my Bible. But every morning I will walk past my Bible laying on my kitchen table, and I will have the opportunity, as Moses did, to look at my Bible and say, that's a book written by God. It is a living, active book inspired by God. Yeah, that's crazy. And then walk right on by it. Or I can do as Moses did and say, there is a book pinned down that are the very words of God, inspired by Him. It is active, it is living, it can divide my heart and my thoughts, and it can completely change my life. And I can say, I'm going to walk on by, or I can say, behold, I will now turn aside and see this thing, this great thing. And when Moses decided, I'm going to stop and I'm going to take the time, I'm going to make the deliberate effort, the deliberate attempt to behold this great thing, look at what happened. God spoke to him. Here's your takeaway from that. Moses took the time to look on the things of God. And when he did, God spoke to him. And He will do the same thing for me. And He will do the same thing for you. I cannot emphasize to you enough the importance of a quiet, devoted, daily time to God with His Word. I cannot emphasize that. I think that we do just like Moses had the opportunity of doing. He could have seen it, said, that's crazy, and walked right on by. But it says, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. He made a deliberate attempt to focus on this thing of God. And when he did, God spoke to him. Can I tell you that if you will take the time and you will say, God, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to take the time to focus on this. And you will make time for the things of God. He will speak to you. He will speak to you. Now that might not be earth-shaking to you. It is to me. It is to me. And I love how it's written that he saw it, but then he said, I'm now going to turn aside and I'm really going to slow down and I'm going to look at it. And it said the Lord spoke to him. Now let's keep on reading. So the Lord speaks to him, and then he says, basically, now I'm going to do something with you, Moses. Turn over to chapter 4. In chapter 4 of Exodus, the Lord says to Moses, I'm going to use you, man. I'm going to send you back to Egypt where you ran from. I'm going to use you, and you're going to do a great thing. You're actually going to deliver my people. And in chapter 4, if you look at verse number 1, Moses answered and said to God, he said, but behold, they will not believe me. They're not going to hearken to me. They're not going to listen to my voice. He said, for they will say, the Lord has not appeared to you. So God says, I got a great plan for you, Moses. I didn't just come all the way out here and strike that bush up on fire to speak to you just to have you ignore me. He said, I've called you out because I'm going to do something great with you. And as Tiffany mentioned in our blog thing, she said, you know what? All Moses could do was make excuses. Well, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do it. And he said right here, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to believe me. And I want you to look at what God said to Moses in verse 2. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? He said, what is that in your hand, Moses? And you know what Moses said? He said, it's a rod. Do you know why Moses had a rod in his hand? Listen to this. This is going to be a great mind-blowing point. You ready? You know why Moses had a rod in his hand? Because he was a shepherd. And isn't that what every shepherd has in their hand? Don't we see that in every Christmas play? It's called a shepherd's crook, and they carry it and they use it to herd their sheep with and to tend to their flocks with. But I don't want you to miss this, though. Moses said, Lord, how am I going to do this? They're not going to believe me. They're not going to understand. They're not going to listen to me. And God's great plan for Moses was this. Well, let's see. Let's figure this out, Moses. What you got in your hand? And you know what Moses had in his hand was a tool that was associated with his profession. And he said, well, you got a rod in your hand. He said, throw it down. It became a serpent. Pick it up. It's a stick. Throw it down. Pick it up. Throw it down. Pick it up. And he said, we'll work with that rod, Moses. We'll work with that rod. You know, when God saved me almost 20 years ago, you know what he said to me? I didn't just save you to save you, Jennifer. And contrary to contrary to popular belief, God did not just save us to keep us from hell. It's not as simple as, do you want to go to hell? What idiot's going to tell you they want to go to hell? I mean, I'm just being honest. What 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, really anybody that's not just trying to be defined is going to tell you, yeah, I want to go to hell. It's more than God just saving us because He doesn't want us to go to hell. He said, I saved you because I had a plan for your life. And you know, in a strange kind of way, just like Moses, I say, well, Lord, how are you ever going to do anything with me? And you know what God says to me and what God says to you? Well, what's in your hand, Jennifer? Do you know what's in my hand 9 times out of 10? A cookie. And I was like, you know what's usually in my hand 9 times out of 10? An expo marker or a red pen or an agenda, you know? That's what's in my hand. Because do you know where I spend the majority of my time and what usually occupies my hands, what I always have in my hand, is being at that school. And just like God said to Moses that I'm going to use this shepherd's stick that is a sign of your occupation and we're going to make that work, God says to me, you know what, Jennifer? I'm going to use what's in your hands. I'm going to use, and don't just think of literal things, I'm going to use that opportunity that you have every day, 8 hours a day with those students in that classroom. I'm going to use that and I'm going to accomplish with you the very same thing I wanted to accomplish through Moses. I'm going to let you make a difference in some people's lives. And he would say to you, what's in your hand? Well, I've always got Tylenol, ibuprofen, and hall passes myself, or a phone calling parents, you know? Well, then I'm going to use that's in your hand. Well, I've always got, the only thing I have in my hands is I have my children in my hands. Then God's desire is to use your children, to use your life to impact your children's life. And also, hey, you know, you get opportunities to talk with people that I don't get. You know, how unusual would it be for me just to hang around the McDonald's play place just because I just wanted to talk to the other adults that are there? Well, eventually somebody's going to say, well, what child's yours? Oh, none of them are mine. Roll call. All my kids, get over here right now. Creep in the play place. Creep in the play place. Stranger danger. Stranger danger. You have opportunities because of what's in your hand that I don't have because of what's not in my hand. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I might say to Emmy, all right, what's in your hand, Emmy? A basketball. Then God's going to use that basketball. Okay? He's going to use those opportunities that you have with those people. Well, what's in your hand? Well, I'm a coach. Well, what's in your hand? Well, I'm a physical therapist. What's in your hand? Well, I have this. Well, God didn't even get fancy with Moses. He said, well, what is that in your hand? And Moses said, a rod. God will use whatever's in your hand. We think too hard. We think too big. We think, oh, God's going to have to do this miraculous thing. He's going to have to send me to seminary. He's going to have to give me this. He's going to have to teach me that. He's going to have to really put me here and set me up. No, He's going to ask you, what is in your hand? All right, then let's go with that, and let's use whatever is in your hand. And you know what that is? That's a thing that we overlook. It's called workplace evangelism. Not to call anybody out this morning, but do you know why Mosley's in this Sunday school class this morning? Do you know why? Because she got a job across the hall from Mia. Did Mia invite you here? How did I guess?
So did you.
How did I guess? And so did I. It's workplace relationships where God said, hey, I want to save Mosley. Well, I'll get her to Young's Grove to save her. I don't have to, but He saw that would be His plan. He said, well, Mia, you're at that office. Why don't you just invite? God uses those things. And we're always looking, oh, Lord, what you going to do? Well, what's in your hand? Let's just start right there. Isn't that the logical place to start? God will use whatever it is that's in your hand if we ask Him to do that and we seek Him in those ways. That's the second thing that I learned from Moses, is that He'll use what is in our hands. And so as God says, I'm going to use that serpent, excuse me, I'm going to use that stick, I'm going to use that rod, and He goes and He said, they'll believe you when they see you put that rod down and you pick it up like a stick. And there's a lot of other things to be noticed as you continue to read in those chapters about how, you know what, the Egyptians, the magicians were able to do the same things, you know. They could throw down and they could pick up too, and they could change things, and they could perform different miraculous acts as well. Don't tell me black magic's not real. It's evidence right here in the book of Exodus that they were able to do things without the power of God that they were able to do through the power of God. But there was a limit. All right? Then let's continue to go over and let's look at another thing that I found interesting and helpful from the life of Moses. Let's look at when the plagues start. We're familiar with how one of the ways that God did what He said He would do through Moses, He would have the people of Israel delivered from the hand of Pharaoh. One of the ways that He did that was He sent plagues in the land of Egypt. And He sends these plagues, and one at a time the plagues come, and Pharaoh has the opportunity. Either he's going to let them go or he's not. And then there's another plague, and then there's another plague. I want you to notice something about these plagues, and I'm going to be honest yet again. When I was younger, I would read the plagues, and I'd think, what is there to, what do you really take away from the plagues? I guess it's just the fact that God will do some crazy things to get His people out of trouble. You know, I don't know what to take away, but I want you to look at Exodus chapter number 7. Look at verse number 5. Exodus chapter number 7, verse number 5 says this, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth my hand upon Egypt, and I bring out the children of Israel from among them. I'm going to read that again. He said, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch forth my hand. Now here's the deal. That's exactly what these plagues were about. It's exactly. God said, I'm going to make a showing right here that the people of Egypt, they're not going to miss. But here's what I would submit to you. You know, not only did the people of Egypt and Pharaoh, not only did they see that, oh man, this really is a powerful God who is able to do all these things, but you know, it also showed the children of Israel who God was too. I think it showed Moses who God was as well. And I think it'll be a good reminder to us of who God is if we'll look at Him again. Now, I don't want to go verse by verse, but I wrote all the 10 plagues down in the center column of my Bible, and I just want us to look at a couple of them, and I think it'll give us a good reminder. Look at the first one. The first plague was turning the water into blood. Do you know what I believe that showed of God? I believe it showed of God that, hey, even these rivers, the very water system of the country of Egypt, the very water system, you know who controls it? I do. And if I want to make it flow backward, I will. We can chalk everything up to there's a scientific reason for everything, and there's a reason that the oceans are salty. Job said, who told the oceans that you could only come this far? God set the parameters. You know what I mean? And then God would say even about this river, He says, you want to know who controls that river? I do. Watch this. I'll turn that very river, a huge river, I'm going to turn it to blood. Well, then I thought about blood. I thought, you know, blood's not just like food coloring in water. Blood's made of plasma, and now I'm over my head. That's all I know. Some of y'all else help me out in the medical field here, but blood's kind of complex, isn't it? It's got a, you know, there's a certain way that it's made and has these different white blood cells, red blood cells, blah, blah, blah. And God did that just because, and He said, and I can do it in a river. That's impressive. Number one. All right? Look at the next one. Frogs and lice and flies. You know what God said? He said, you know what? I control the very water system of this country. If I want to turn that river to blood, I will. Watch me do it. Bam, there it is. Look at who I am. And then he said, and you know what? I can even tell the common housefly when to fly into your area, and when I want him gone, I can tell them to fly out, and guess what? They'll fly out. I mean, you want to talk about the Lord of the flies. I mean, the Lord even over the flies. And he said, and same thing, you know what? The frogs. I can tell the frogs when to hop over into your area. And it says that when they had the plague of the frogs were in the oven. They were in the house. They were in their bed. That makes me sick to think of it, man. I mean, frogs everywhere. And God said, and you know what? And the crazy thing is, I love it when it says, and it says he told the frogs, now die. And it said they just piled them up. It says in verse 14, they gathered them together into heaps and the land stank. It doesn't say stuff. It says the land stank.
What verse?
Verse number 14. Chapter 8, verse number 14, and the land stank. You know what that shows me? God controls the heartbeat of every frog on this planet. And he can tell the houseflies when to come on in and when to get on out. And they couldn't have flown into Egypt if they wanted to, because God said, nope, I don't want another fly in Egypt. Man, that's a powerful God, you know? And then he said, and I'll put lice bugs in your hair. Every nurse's nightmare.
We're cursed with a plague of, what is it?
Every day.
Every day.
Yes, lice. He said, I'll put lice in your head. I mean, tell me that God is not in control of this place right here. I mean, you know, tell me that God is not got his hand in everything that's going on. Tell me that. You're crazy. I'll tell you, no, if he wants to give you lice, he'll give you lice. And then he goes on to say, he said, and then I'll go bigger. I'll make all the cattle die. He was a God over the very life of every heart beating in the cattle there in the land of Egypt. And he took their lives. And then look at this. Then he goes even more personal. Not verse number 6, but the 6th plague. He put boils on every person who was there in Egypt. Boils are something that came up on their bodies. He said, I got control over your very own immune system to cause your body to have boils to pop up all over you. That's who I am. I'm just telling you, I don't know about you, but when I look at the plagues in that way, I'm impressed all over again. Like, man, God, your ability is phenomenal. It's unreal. It's crazy to think that you can do this. And then he says, and then watch, I feel like these kind of all address different things. He says, I'll send hail from the heavens. I'll show you that I'm over that too. The things that fall, not only the things that are on the earth and the things therein, he said, but the things that fall from the heaven, I'll send hail, because I control that too. And then he said locusts, and then here's the most impressive one to me, darkness. If I don't want to make the sun shine, the sun won't shine. And the sun didn't shine. How can you miss that that's a powerful God? I mean, you know, and I'm saying this as a reminder to us. I want you to remember that the very God who can say to that fly in yonder, or drop dead, or he can put boils on the body of every person, or he can make the sun stand still, and he can cause darkness. Man, that's a God with some crazy power. Believe that? I mean, agree? That's a God with some crazy power. And that's the God that we're serving. But we think our problems are too great for him. Man, he could do all these things. We need to recognize who we are serving here. He is a powerful, phenomenal, amazing God. And I think it's worth our time just to pause and look at the plagues one more time. Now, the last thing I want us to look at, and this will take probably the most of our time, is I want us to look in Exodus chapter 8. I think that some of the most impressive things that happen right here. The most applicable things that will be very helpful to us have happened right here in Exodus chapter 8. Now, after all these plagues have occurred, maybe Pharaoh says, well, you've loosened me up a little bit. Now I'm ready to bargain. And Pharaoh does what we call compromising. Now, you know, compromise is not always a bad thing, right? When we hear the word compromise, we think, oh, no compromise. We don't ever want to compromise. Do you not compromise with your spouse sometimes? I mean, surely, right? He says, I want this place to eat. You say, no, I don't want that. He says, but I really want it. And don't you, he compromises with you or you compromise with him, right? There are compromises. Compromise is not always a bad thing. But let me tell you this. To ever compromise with the devil is a really bad thing. And what I learned from the life of Moses is that he was not a man of compromise. Because here's the next story that comes up in the book of Exodus. After these plagues have come and gone, all 10 of them, then Pharaoh says, all right, I'm ready to bargain. I got a deal. He says, I'll work with you here. I've seen who your God is. Now, Moses, I want to call you in and let's have a conversation. Now, look, in Exodus chapter 8, I think you're going to like this. Exodus chapter 8, let's look at verse number 25. Here's the first compromise. And a lot of times, if you're not careful when you're reading, you just read very quickly and you pass over these things. And I want this to call your attention to it. Now, I put a big 1 beside verse number 25. Here's the first compromise. All right, look at what Pharaoh says. Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron, and he said, go ye, sacrifice to your God in the land. Now, I circled the words, in the land. The first deal, the first bargaining attempt that Pharaoh was going to make with Moses is he says, all right, this God of yours that y'all want to serve and you want to sacrifice to and you want to have a relationship with, he says, all right, I see him through his power in these plagues. He says, okay, I got to deal with you. First, here's my first offer. He said, go ahead and sacrifice to this God, but do it in the land. He says, stay here in Egypt, but have the relationship with this God that you want to have with him. Now, in case you don't know this, or in case you've forgotten, make a note of this. Egypt has always been and always will be a type of the world. When you talk about being in Egypt, you're talking about being in the world. And when you talk about going to Canaan land, you're talking about the victorious Christian victory that God gives Christian people, that he can take you out of Egypt, take you out of the world, take you out of bondage, and he can lead you by his hand to Canaan, which is the victorious Christian life. There's a song, what is it? Egypt was once my home, I was a slave, helpless and sin did roam, love light did crave, but then I looked up to heaven's land, Christ came to save, I'm living in Canaan now. Egypt behind. Okay, crossed over Jordan wide, gladness to find. Don't miss. No longer I am blind. No. Yeah, it's a good one. And the Egypt has always been a type of the world, and Canaan is always a picture of the victorious Christian life, the place where God wants to take you to. Now, don't miss this. Pharaoh said, I got a deal with you. Look, go ahead and worship the God, but stay right here and do it. Is the devil not making this same bargain with a lot of people today? It's a compromise, and it sounds like a fine offer, because you know what it basically says? You can have the best of both worlds. Pharaoh said, go ahead and worship your God, but stay right here, keywords, in the land. Do you know that there are a ton of people, I would say there are more people doing this than there are people who are doing it right, that try this very compromise with Satan as it relates to their salvation. They don't ever want to leave the world. They know when they make the decision, they don't really ever want to give up the things of the world. They don't want to give up the ways of the world, but they want to have a relationship with God, and 9 times out of 10, you know what they want? They don't want to go to hell. So the devil makes this compromise with them, makes this offer to them, makes this bargain and says, all right, if you want to do this whole church thing, if you want to get on this whole Jesus bandwagon, then you go right ahead and serve him or whatever, sacrifice to him, but just do it staying right here in the world where you are. And you know what Moses said about that compromise? No. And let me tell you what God's idea about that compromise still is. No, it does not work. Christianity will cost you something. It costs you relationships. It costs you the values and the morals that this world pushes down our throats and shoves in our face all of the time. But let me tell you, this compromise that was offered to Moses was not a man of compromise. He said, no, it will not work. You cannot try to serve God and have a relationship with Him and stay in that same world system, submitting yourself to its values and its beliefs. It will not work. Now you tell me, is the devil not trapping a lot of people in this same compromise, this same pit? But let me tell you something. As Christians and as believers, we cannot fall for this. We cannot fall for it. And I think even deeper, we've got to have those difficult conversations with people and say, God didn't let Moses agree to that. He said, I want to take you out of that. I want to make you a completely different people. We are to be in the world, but not of this world. We are called to be different. And that was the first compromise, and Moses refused it. He said, no, absolutely not. Look at the second compromise. Isn't this the way that it works? When somebody rejects you the first time, you try to sweeten the deal a little bit, right? You say, okay, well, if you didn't like that offer, well, let me give you just a little bit of a better offer. And Pharaoh was an early on used car salesman, I guess, and he started sweetening the deal. And look at the second compromise. In verse number 28, Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. But here's the condition. Only ye shall not go very far away. You shall not go very far away. Now there are people who will make the same argument today. They'll say, I'm not staying in the world. I mean, I've come away from that. But basically what they do, in a sense, is they do this right here. I've come away from that, but I'm just close enough that I can always reach back and grab it when I want to. And people try to live that relationship with God. And guess what Moses said about that compromise? No, I'm not going to do it. Now I'm telling you, this story took place 1,500 years before Christ was ever born. Here we are living 2,000 years after Christ, and the devil's strategies have not changed. And I'm trying to tell you this. We can look at what Pharaoh did with Moses. It's a type of the way that the devil still works and still twists in our heads today. We still have people thinking, and sometimes we fall into this same trap. I stay just close enough that if I ever get uncomfortable, we make commitments, but then not full all the way commitments. We say, I want to do this, but then when it gets difficult, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go right back to what was always comfortable. But that is not okay. And that's the very same thing that Pharaoh tried to get Moses to do. And Moses said, absolutely not. Do you know what we're called to do as Christians? We are called to repent, which means turn in the opposite direction. And we are called to run as quickly as we can away from the ways of Satan and away from the ways of the devil. And the compromise will always be stay just close enough that you can always pick it back up again. And I'm telling you that we have to work. We have to ask the Lord to deliver us from this, to take us far away from it. So his second compromise was, well, you can worship, but you just shouldn't go very far away. Don't we like to have the best of both worlds? I was reading the other day about this group of people. You've heard of a vegetarian, right? I was going to text Laurel and tell her about this. Oh, Mosley, you're a vegetarian. Mosley, tell me how you feel about this then. There are people called vegetarians. Now, not from Mosley, but from somebody else. You've heard that word long enough. What's a vegetarian?
Don't eat meat.
They don't eat meat. Okay, and then is there a different category where you don't eat any byproducts? You don't eat eggs or what is that? That's a vegan, okay? Now, what do y'all think about this? And then we'll get Mosley's opinion. There's this group of people, they say, I'm a vegetarian, but I like sausage. And so they say, I am a vegetarian, but I eat sausage. Is that a vegetarian? No. And vegetarians got upset about it. Okay? And so the vegetarian said, wait, now you can't call yourself a vegetarian if you're going to turn around and say you eat sausage. No. It's like you're breaking the code. You can't do that. So then this is a real story. I'm not making this up. So then the vegetarian, probably NVS, the National Vegetarian Society, they said, no, if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to call yourself by a different name. And you know what? They have a name. It's called a flexitarian. A flexitarian.
You need to let Laurel know.
Let Laurel know.
A vegetarian that eats deer meat.
That eats deer meat. And hey, I'd be offended if I was a rock solid diehard, vegetarian. I'm not going to have you going by my title, but then thinking you can throw in a little sausage on the side. I mean, no. And so they came up with their own title as, well, we're flexitarians. We do eat vegetarian 90% of the time, except when sausage is on the table. Then we partake. And that's absurd, I'm going to be honest. You're either a vegetarian or you're not. But you know what? It's the same thing with Christianity. I'm a Christian, but I just like to still keep on doing this. Well, I'm a Christian, but I just still can't ever see that I need to give up this. Then you're not a Christian. God's an all or nothing kind of God. You know what I'm saying? I mean, He calls us to a complete life of separation. Not to be boring rocks. It's not like that. But to live differently. And He'll call us out from among those things. So people try to stay close enough, but just not getting too far away. Now, before I go on to the third one and the fourth one, I want to look at a verse that stood out to me in chapter 9. In chapter 9, verse number 16, the Lord was talking to Pharaoh here, and this is what He said. He said, in chapter 9, verse number 16, He said, in very deed, for this cause have I raised thee up. He's talking to Pharaoh. He said, certainly, in very deed, for this cause have I raised thee up. Look at what He said was the reason that He put Pharaoh where he was. Look at what He said. He said, to show in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. As I read that, I thought, Pharaoh became a negative example of this. He said, because of what you're not doing, I'm still going to use you to show my power and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. He said, even though Pharaoh was a negative example. But you know what I liked about this verse? I thought the same thing that God said to Pharaoh is the same thing He would say to me and He would say to every one of you. He would say, Jesse, for this cause have I called you up, have I raised you up, to show in you my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Madison, that's the reason that God called you up. For this cause I have raised you up, to show in you my power, that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. That's powerful, And my prayer that day, as I read and I meditated on this scripture, my prayer that day was, Lord, do this very thing in me. Do this very thing in me. Show your power through me. You know what people should see when they look at us? They should see people who are struggling, yes, but we are victorious. And when we're victorious, you know what that shows? God's power. When we are allowing the Holy Spirit to be at work in our lives and they see, man, this person struggles just like I do, but for some reason I keep falling and failing and stumbling and falling, but they can be victorious. You know what our answer should be? Because we have the Holy Spirit of God working within us. God wants to use each and every one of us for this very cause, that my power should be shown in thee and that my name can be declared throughout all the earth. You know what God wants to use our mouths for? Declaring His name to the whole earth. You know what He wants to use our bodies, our lives, and our vessels for? To show His power in us. And my prayer this day and continual days is this: God, do that very thing in me. That is the reason that He called us out. Now let's look at the third and the fourth compromise. The third one is perhaps the most applicable to us, especially any of you in here who have children, and I'll try to be as non-controversial with this as I can, but I think it's very fitting. It's very fitting. Pharaoh was no idiot, and it's very interesting how that Satan's scheme has not changed after all these years. Look at this one, especially to people with children. Look in Exodus chapter 10, verse number 8. Here's the third compromise. When Moses said, no, I won't stay here, he said, then don't go very far. No, I won't do that. Look at the third one. The third one is this. Moses and Aaron were brought again unto Pharaoh. He said unto them, go serve the Lord your God. But who are they that are going? Moses said, we will go, our young, our old, our sons, our daughters, our flocks, our herds, will all go. Look at what Pharaoh says in verse number 10. He said to them, let the Lord be so with you if I'll let you and your little ones go. He said, look to it, for evil's before you. He said, not so. I'm not going to let you go and take the little ones with you. He said, go now, ye that are men, and serve the Lord. Pharaoh made a petition about their children. And this was Pharaoh's thought. You can go as adults, you can go as you who are men, and you can serve the Lord, but he said, oh, there's really going to be trouble if you take your children with you. See the way he worded that in verse number 10? He said, yeah, let the Lord be so with you as I will let you go when your little ones. Look to it, for evil is before you. He made this petition. He said, adults, do your adult thing. But he said, let your children stay here in the world. It's not right that you take your children out and take them into this danger of this relationship that is so secluded and sold out to the Lord. He said, let your children stay here and just the old people go. And basically what he said is this: let the children have what they want. You know what's best for your children, that they stay here in Egypt. Egypt is the land of plenty. He said, there's opportunities here in Egypt that they are not going to have if you go trompsing out through the wilderness in pursuit of this God you're looking after. He said, you do what's best. You who are old, y'all go ahead, but you let your children stay here and benefit from the opportunities. You know, even the most godly parents fall into this trap of desiring worldly prosperity and positions for their children, do they not? Even the most godly parents. I'll step over a boundary line and I'll say this. Even the most godly parents are letting their children run their homes, make the decisions, and set the course for the actions that their lives will take. And that, my friends, is a danger, and that is a pitfall. And it was a strategy that the devil used through Pharaoh 4,000 years ago. And Moses, thank God, was smart enough to say no. No. He said, no, I'm not leaving my children to enjoy the pleasures of the world for a time. If I go in pursuit of God, I'll take my children with me. And I don't know about you, and I try to be very careful as it relates to how I speak about children. I don't have the first child. But in my 10 years teaching, I've had over 1,000. And maybe I'm wrong, and you can argue with me how it's different. Actually, you can't argue because I won't argue back. You could yell at me. I know a little something about children because I've dealt with them. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I know they're not my own, but I've had some close encounters with over 1,000 of them. And I'm telling you that God has called us as godly women, as godly mothers, to make the best decisions for our children and not to fall unto the devil's pit as it relates to them. And the devil, through Pharaoh, I'm going to say it again, said, don't take your children with you. He said, if you're old and you want to go to this all-in relationship with the Lord, then so be it. But at least let your children do the prosperous things that this world has to offer. And Moses said, no. I mean, where do I even start? Do I have to prove a point to you that that's what we're doing? Do I have to prove a point to you? Do I have to, and of course I'd never do it, but Lord, would I have to just show you an example right in front of your face? Or are 1,000 of them not scrolling through your mind right now of people who just, they want to have a relationship with their kids, but they don't have the intestinal fortitude to say, you shut your mouth, I'm the adult, you're the child, you're going to do what's right in my house. I don't care what Sonia's mama's doing. I don't care what all your friends have. I don't care. I'm not letting you get caught up in this world system. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. Now, I know it's probably easier said than done, and I know some of y'all are looking at me like, well, yeah, you go ahead. But, I mean, I wish somebody would at least just say, you know, amen or A-woe man or something. I mean, come on, right? I'm not saying this. This was what the devil was saying through Pharaoh to Moses. Hey, you go on, but let your kids stay in the world. Let them have the opportunities that are provided before them. I'm telling you something. If we don't get a hold on this, I say we as Christians who ought to have some common sense, if we don't realize that kids will push and push and push, and they'll try everything, and they'll manipulate, and they will twist, and they will finagle, and they'll have you wrapped around their fingers, and you'll grow up, and they'll grow up, and they'll be 20 years old, and ashamed to say, you'll sit there and say, Lord, what have I done? Lord, what have I done? Why did I not emphasize the importance of godly things and spiritual righteous principles with this child now? And then isn't that the real truth? It's like, oh Lord, now they're 17 and they're out of control. They were out of control when they were 5 years old, but you laughed at it and thought it was cute. They were disrespectful when they were 3.5 years old, and you didn't correct that in them. Now your uncorrected child becomes an intolerable adult. That's being harsh, isn't it? I should calm down. But I'm telling you, when I taught 6th grade for 8 years, and I'd call parents in and I'd say, ma'am, Miss Brown, you're Brown, I'm sorry, no, not Miss Brown, Miss Carter, oh, well, that's Laura, hang on. Miss so-and-so, I'm really having trouble with your child. That would be the next step. And I would say, they're very disrespectful. I'd say I'll just ask her or him. I'll just ask them to, put away what they're fooling with. I'll ask them to get on task with what we're doing. I'll say they'll roll their eyes at me. That is disrespectful. I say I'll ask them to do something. They'll straight up tell me no. And you know what I started hearing? And I hear it 9 times out of 10. Well, Lord, they do the same thing to me. I thought, well, you can whip that tail. I can't. And that's what we would get. I get that 9 times out of 10. I'm not kidding. I'm not making that up. I'll call and they'll say, oh, they're out of control at home too. And I think, man, we got to reel our children back in. And
the kids hear that.
Oh, the kids hear that.
Just go
Right.
run with it.
Right. They just run with it. And I'm challenging you. I'm saying, and I'm that bad when I know, and I get accused of, well, you don't have kids of your own. Let me tell you, when I do, they won't be like that. And I know you're saying, oh, careful now. I'm saying they will not disrespect me without me popping that tail. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying they're not going to be crazy, they're not going to be wild, but there will be repercussions, I'll tell you that. You got to go down trying. And I'm just challenging you, and listen, don't let this come off as, wow, she's standing up there with no kids going to sit here and tell me. I'm just saying it's a problem, and I see it, and you see it, and you know it, and I know it's harder for you because you're sitting there with them and you're trying, and I know that, but I'm just trying to get you to see that this ain't a new thing of let the kids decide, do what's prosperous, and that's not a new thing. 4,000 years ago, Pharaoh said, you can go, you that are men, and serve the Lord, but not take your little ones with you. Let them stay here and do what's best. And I'm challenging you, and I'm asking you, and I'm pleading with you, hey, you make the decisions, and you say, oh no, just like Moses did. He said, no, there's a right way, and there's a wrong way, and in this house, we'll do the right way. Okay, enough of that. I'm sorry. Don't mean to be difficult. I'm not saying these things because I sit around here and I look at y'all's children. I'm saying these things because every single day, my job is to deal with 1,000 of them. I have about 100 a year. This year, I have 100. Some of them are good, and some of them are just out of control. And I'm challenging you. You make the decisions. You pray for God to give you the wisdom to make the right choices. But just don't let the children decide what's best for them. What they think is best is not. Let's move on. Let's look at the last compromise. The last compromise is kind of tricky to understand, I think, but when you look at it, you kind of figure it out. In verse number 24. Exodus chapter 10, verse number 24. Pharaoh called to Moses and he said, go serve the Lord. He said, only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go with you. So see, he lets up on the thing that he held so rigidly to the last time. The last time it was, let the little ones stay. Well, now he says, you can go, take your little ones, but he says, let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Now, at first glance you think, well, this is just Pharaoh trying to make a deal with them to get all their stuff. Like, leave your flocks, leave your herds, because that's going to be worth something. At deeper look, I don't think that's what it is. Because here's what Moses said. He said, you must give us our sacrifices and burnt offerings that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Because here's the thing. Moses said, as soon as we get out there, The first thing we're going to want to do when we get to where we're going to want to sacrifice to God. And we're going to need the very animals that you're wanting to hold. And that's the picture. There would always be something that they had to turn around and look for. Always leaving just enough behind that you had to turn around and look for something to reach back and to go back to. And I like what Moses said. Look at verse number 26. I put a little smiley face in my Bible. Moses said, "No, our cattle shall go with us. There shall not be a hoof left behind." If I had a cattle moving company, I'd paint that on the back of my trailer. Not a hoof left behind. Just to reassure cattlemen that every hoof got on that trailer, and by golly, every hoof will get on. I loved it. I put a little smiley face. Not a hoof left behind.
He didn't give in.
He did not give in. And you say, okay, so this is about things. It's about possessions. Well, yeah, it kind of is. And it's this picture. When you say, I'm leaving and I'm heading for a relationship with God, don't let anything be something that you have to constantly turn around and look back after. You say, I'm lost, Jennifer. I'm not getting this. So when I get saved, I leave my house, I leave my car, I leave my camper. No, but you just take them all with you and you say, these are God's too. So that they never become something that is a thing that holds you back, because you're always turning around to it and having issues with how that's going to fit into your life as well. But if when you come in, you come all in, you say, no, not a hoof left behind, not a tire, not a thing, not a dime. Every bit of it's coming over into my relationship with God, but He gets all of it right off the bat. I would love to say to you this morning that God's a God of compromise and God's a God of bargaining. And I would love to say to you, if you want to come to Him, but you still want to let your kids just be involved in everything that pulls you away from the house of God, and you want to do that, I'd love to say God's okay with that. If you want to say, I want a relationship with God, but I don't want to get too far away, I would love to say, God's fine with that. He understands. People's famous phrase, isn't it? I taught a whole lesson one time on something I remember teaching, and at the very end, somebody just took away my whole 50 minutes of effort with, well, I believe God understands.
No, you got to say it in your voice.
Huh? Oh, God understands. He understands. That was her. And she said it over and over. I just think that God understands. God understands that we just can't, blah, blah, everything I just taught that God expects us to do. She just took my feet out from under me with, God understands. I just think God understands. No, God doesn't understand. And I'm telling you, as we look at these compromises, I'm telling you this, and I'll say this. I'll say this right here. I'd love to tell you that God will let you bargain and He'll let you compromise. He won't. But if you'll go all in, He's the best God. You won't regret any of it. Take it all and give it all to Him and leave all the rest behind. But you won't regret it. I'm a voluntary slave to Him. I'm a voluntary slave. I willingly give myself as a slave to Him. You know why? He's the best master. He doesn't call me property. He calls me His daughter. He gives me His name. God's an all-in God. No room for compromise, but it's worth it. It is very worth it.